Please can you remind me if you'll be so kind, staring out into space, asking God to hear my case, trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last? The purple angel, purple angel, purple angel, you're next to me.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm Lori LeBay, the host and founder. I created Alzheimer Speaks because my mom had dementia for 30 years. And I was a frustrated daughter and family member who really believed that we need to have more information, more products, services, and tools in our hands. And so Alzheimer Speaks is really about raising everyone's voice, and so that we can find all those answers that we need. We also have kind of turned into this media outlet that helps companies expand their brand footprint as well through our following, because again, we want people to find and be able to have choice of what they need in their own life and their own journey with dementia. And you, our listeners, well, gosh, we'd be nothing without you. You see, it's your likes, your clicks, your shares that has really raised our profile. So I want to thank you, and I also want to invite you to be a guest, because chances are you have a story to share as well. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. You can go to alzheimerspeaks.com, which is our main website, and there's a big contact button up in the upper right-hand corner, and shoot me an email or, give me a holler. I would be more than glad to chat with you. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I want to give a shout out to a few organizations. The first is Dementia Action Alliance. They are a group that is really about reimagining dementia and becoming more person-centered, more relationship-based, and helping those with dementia raise their voice. And they're having a conference. It's actually their second one this June, the 20th through the 22nd in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's a fabulous conference, and I would encourage you to go if you are at all available. Next, I just want to give a shout out to Gable Pines. I've been doing some educational programs with them. And this Friday, May 3rd, we're going to be doing an educational program called As the Cookie Crumbles. And it's going to be talking about how dementia progresses, what it looks like, and how to find hope, how to maintain yourself and your loved one you might be taking care of, or if you're a professional care partner, how can you do the best you can in that job? And that'll be May 3rd, Friday, from 10:30 to 12:30 in Vadnais Heights, Minnesota. And you can call them and attend for free. It's 651-829-3171. That's 651-829-3171. Now, let me introduce our guest today. I'm very excited to have Karen Severson with us. She is a geriatric psychiatrist with over 20 years experience working both in hospitals and in nursing homes. And her passion is really to educate families and professionals on what she's learned from working in those environments, and to also improve end-of-life care for those dealing with all forms of neuro-cognitive illnesses. She's written a book with a really interesting title. It's called Look, I Shrunk Grandma, a psychiatrist's guide to nursing homes and dementia and end of life. And so welcome, Karen. How are you doing today?
Super excited to be here. You've inspired me to talk about my own book just for that introduction.
Well, I'm glad, because it's something that we do need to talk about. But before we even dive into the book, let's talk about the book itself and the title. What made you choose the title? Look, I Shrunk Grandma, and kind of the front cover and the look itself.
Yeah, I really I was working in an assisted living, and they asked me to do a memory testing. So we asked everybody in the building to come down and get their memory checked. So I sat there and waited and waited and waited, and nobody showed up. I'm like, oh my goodness, everybody's afraid to come down and get a memory screen. So I realized it's hard to talk about this subject. So I thought, why don't I write something that's funny that people could kind of read about a serious subject and laugh? Not that it's a funny subject at all, but it helps to get through this thick and sometimes painful material if you have a sense of humor. So it was kind of hard to write a book that was funny and talked about such a serious subject without offending anybody or upsetting anybody. But I felt to get people to read it and not avoid looking at it, I had to do something that was, and I think I'm kind of funny sometimes. I don't know, not everybody finds me funny, but I try my best. If you talk with nurses and doctors, we all develop a sense of humor to deal with some very traumatic and upsetting situations. So one way we cope with that is develop a sense of humor. So that's why I tried to find something funny that would not make people so intimidated or afraid of the subject. So that's how that name came about.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And I think most families use humor too. I mean, one of the favorite things, I love to do is laugh with family and friends. And sometimes we take ourselves too seriously when there's an illness, and we forget how important that is, how that lifts us up, how that makes us feel human, how it, just kind of puts us in that tribe mentality where we belong. And when we are too sad, when we're too frightened, when we're too scared, when we're too filled with angst, that just kind of, perpetuates between us and builds and cannot be real healthy. So I appreciate you taking that angle, because this isn't, but yet one that we need to learn a little bit more about.
Mom passed from breast cancer, and she passed in the process while I was in medical school. She actually was a patient in my medical school and died eventually while in the hospital that I was training at. And that had her death and dying and suffering and search for a better life or a cure or to live longer had such an impact on me. So it's a little bit different. It's still an end of life issue and trying to improve quality of life and length of life, but in a different illness. So I kind of compare the both a lot. And I spent a lot of time right after she passed. I took a year. This is probably not the smartest thing to do, but I was offered a pathology fellowship where I did autopsies. And then again, I was talking about looking at death and dying, and studied a lot of the brain doing autopsies. So I think that also impacted me. The rest of my career, I looked at death, dying, and how we handle that and deal with that. So that's kind of been my entry to working with this illness. Plus, I love the elderly, and I think they're hilarious a lot of the time. And that's like where I feel my comfort zone. They're like kids. They play. They're fun. So it really was a nice mixture for me. So that's how I fell into this field, the Alzheimer field.
Well, I think it's interesting when you say, they're fresh, they're funny, they play, because I think a lot of times people think, oh, an older person, they can't play, but they don't worry so much about what they say or what other people are going to think. They're not so protected, and they just kind of can cut to the chase. And I know even for myself, I'm a grandma now. Mm-hmm. And I look at, my daughter and her family and raising the kids and how stressed they can be, and how stressed I was when I was a mom. And now as a grandma, oh, it's not a big deal. This too shall pass. I mean, you have this different wisdom. You're pulling from this different sphere of knowledge and balance. And I too, I've always been attracted to our elders. I just think they are so rich and have so much to offer and teach us. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Why do you think it's really important for people to understand neurology, and the pathology of dementia and medications used, especially when we're dealing with those old behaviors?
So in my time in the nursing homes, I would just watch people, and I'd watch families, I would staff, and watch how they would interact with, people suffering from dementia. And a lot of times the way they would communicate, they wouldn't really understand that these people neurologically can't do a lot of things that we take for granted, especially with language. So they would get much more frustrated trying to explain things to people when neurologically the person couldn't do it, and then that would cause a lot of behaviors and issues. So, even with the memory problems, families would really struggle, not just families, nurses too, would really struggle thinking someone could do more than they really could. So I'm like, if you don't really understand the neurology of this disease and why it's happening, then it kind of puts, like, I'm a little bit protective of my patients or my clients, whatever you like to call them, that if people would assume they could do things that they really couldn't, and then that person would end up feeling bad about themselves or less of a person. I really wanted people to get into their world and understand their world so that they wouldn't assume the worst things of that person, because it's not about personality all the time or being a bad person or they were a bad mom when they were little and they continued to be angry and mean. You really have to get into their world and know what their brain is capable of doing and not doing in order to really, understand and not make false attributions to behaviors. So that's why it was really important for me to explain the neurology. I had put a whole chapter in there just like really explaining mostly what the frontal lobe of the brain, which generates behaviors and processes information, and so people wouldn't take things so personally, the family members or the person wouldn't feel quite so bad about what was going on. So it's just increasing understanding and knowledge that, help anxiety and depression. And then working in nursing homes, just to give you an idea, I would walk in and go up to the nurses station and they would see a list of problems I had to deal with or work with. And one of them is, so-and-so is hitting their roommate. So I would have to go evaluate that whole scenario of the hitting, why the behavior. And then I would have to talk to the family member and say, hey, I'm asked to see your mother or father because they're hitting. So part of the issue is that the family members wouldn't see the hitting or the behavior, and they would think that sometimes it was caused by the nursing home or some other issue. And I would really have to spend time convincing families of the behavior's existence, and that isn't always easy to do. So I thought writing this book would kind of help people understand that a lot of the behaviors don't show up when we want them to show up, or that they're going to see them. And the nurses will always see those behaviors, but the families won't. So it becomes just the first step is just getting everybody on the same page as far as a behavior exists. So it's important to know the neurology of dementia to really understand that as well, I think, and I explain that in my book. But also, once you convince the family, like, hey, yes, there is a problem with aggression, we should start this med. Explaining the medications is really hard because they have a lot of side effects, risks, and benefits. And the person's so upset that they're gotten a call because of the behavior in the first place, it's hard for them to take in all this information about medications. So I added a whole chapter on medications, psychiatric medications in layman's terms, so people understand what these meds can do and what they can't do. And that way, I would want that book available for family members to read. So when they do get that call from a nursing home saying that so-and-so has a behavior or a depression, that you'll be prepared to have a good conversation with that nurse and improve the level of care for everybody, because you'll both be on the same page when talking to nursing home staff. So that's a long-winded answer.
It's important, like you said, to explain the neurology, and then there's a whole nother thing of people accepting it. You can explain it all, but there can sometimes still be a lot of denial going on with families, or, well, not my family, that might be your family, but my family would never do such a thing. Or my dad was a pastor or minister. He never spoke like that. And with certain types of dementia, behaviors change. Or I've heard some families say, gosh, I really like this person. I wish this person would have raised us because of the changes. due to the dementia too, where their upbringing, was kind of turbulent and things. So, and I love the point when you talked about trying to get families not to take it personally, because we always, if something is done, we always think it's done to us, and that they're pushing our, you hear families say, well, they're just doing that to push my buttons, and it's like they don't know where the buttons are to push anymore. A lot of times they've lost that ability as the disease progresses, and that is real important. Or when you were saying, family kind of in denial, they would never hit anybody. Somebody must have started it, and they were just defending themselves. It is important to be able to document and relay that in a fashion where families can understand it in order to accept it, because those are big changes. Those are really big changes.
It's important to know how you could best work with the nursing home. And part of it is you're going to get calls. You got to be prepared for these calls. And how do I handle this call? How do I handle this medical decision? I don't want it to be in an emergency. A lot of times it's an emergency setting where someone is so aggressive, they're tearing up a whole room in a nursing home, and we have to say, do we have to send this person to the hospital? Do we need medication? And the family's like, they did what? So there's a lot that has to be expressed and explained in a short amount of time. That's really difficult. I think it's still really hard, going back. I can only imagine what family members must go through when they get those phone calls.
Well, and like you said, it's a big decision in terms of, do they go to the hospital? Because if it's not a geriatric, psych hospital, they might not get what they really need there either. It's almost more of a safety issue a lot of times. And then people can get bounced around, and then that can complicate things as well. And, in nursing homes, memory care, bad things can happen anywhere. They happen a lot of times in our own homes, and they might not be publicized. There might not be a call because nobody wants anybody to know about it, but these things are happening all over, and we have to be more compassionate. We have to have better knowledge in order to deal with it. I talk about the time when I go out and I speak, where my mom would get she would get really confused with the TV. And the television is something we can control very easily, but a lot of times you'll walk into a nursing home or wherever, and the TV is on, and there could be something really traumatic going on with a shooting or a bad accident, and their time perception, they think it's happening outside the door. Well, my mom, for example, she had that issue once, but then another time she was in this period of time where she would watch the TV show Jag all the time. And my mom was always kind of a big political advocate, and she was, very well connected. And so she believed Jag was real. And so then she would talk with the staff, and she'd get really upset when the staff wouldn't know the story. They didn't know what was going on in the country. And my mom, she blew her top, and she would get aggressive. And, they easily could have called and said, hey, medicator, Dorothy's on a rant, and we can't handle this. We don't have time. But instead, what that staff did was they really understood her world. And they came together without any supervisor directing them at all. They came together and said, okay, every week, who's ever off work is going to watch Jag. And they're going to call us, and we're going to log it so we can all talk to Dorothy to keep her calm. And as a family member, that just melted my heart. And I thought, they get it.
Yes.
They get it. So sometimes there can be real simple solutions if we let go of our own anxiety, that anxiety over the change of behavior. Sometimes it can be really simple things that can be changed from, shadows, showing, and they can't find it, and they're getting paranoid because they think someone's there. And it might be as easy as shutting the blinds, so they're not getting those shadows and things.
On the other side, the nurses, they really do want to, a lot of them are overworked, underpaid, poor morale, but they really sincerely do want to help people and want the least medications. So working as a collaborative team with the family is the goal, but sometimes anger starts to fly, people get defensive, people take things personally, or they have a lot of guilt or anxiety of the person being in the nursing home, or it tends to throw off that whole groove that you just explained really well. Like what you just explained is like what we all want, both sides of the equation. The nurses want it and the families want it. I don't know why it always seems so hard to get there.
I think part of it is because we don't talk about it enough. Like one of the things, because my mom wanted to go into the nursing home, which no one ever wants to move into a nursing home. But my mom wanted to go in, even with her dementia, because my dad ended up landing there. He had brain cancer, and for whatever reason, he didn't take the elevator, and he went and he took a tumble down 2 flights of steps. And he was never able to live independently after that. And so the plan was always for my mom to stay with us. And about 2 weeks in, and we got along really well, and we weren't anticipating any problems. And about 2 or 3 weeks in, my mom, comes out and she says, I want to move into the nursing home. And out of my mouth, the family, but that's not the plan. You have to have a plan, and we got to go from A to B to C. We have to follow the plan. And then I asked her why, and she had, this is a woman who couldn't pick out her clothes or tell you what the weather was like. And she said, we've been together 49 and a half years, and I'm not leaving him now. And my heart just melted. And it was like, okay, I'm going to make that happen. And so she ended up moving into the nursing home. But again, I think we get so fast paced, both family and staff, we don't really think out long term what's best or how this is happening or why. And so they said, well, we'll get rid of your dad's roommate, we'll move him, and your mom can move in there. And I said, absolutely not. And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I said, because I don't need both of them dying, and she does not need to watch him die. We're going to lose them both. And I said, I want her on the highest functioning floor because she's really social. And I want her to have one activity and one meal every day on that floor. And the rest of the time I'll take off work and I will bring her up to see my dad, because she couldn't maneuver to another floor or anything. And so we did that for, 2 or 3 months until my dad passed. And when my dad died, she was totally acclimated. And I think she lived as long as she did was because she built these deep friendships and bonds. When the nursing staff would take her for a walk, she was just walking with a friend. How we perceive things is real different. Or when you were talking about with families, I know I never thought I was kind of the staff's worst nightmare, but I'm sure I was, when my mom first moved in. And then I had to sit back and go, I got into it one time and I'm thinking, well, why aren't you doing your job? I know what your job is, and that's the mentality family has. And we have this great guilt because we can't always be there all the time. And we have this great passion to make sure that our person is safe and comfortable and loved and welcomed and has good care. And so the only way that we can make sure that happens, or so we think, is to look for problems. So when we go there, that's what we're looking for. We have to look for things to fix. Well, if we're looking for things to fix, we're going to find things that are broken. And we're not going to notice any of the good stuff that's happening. And that's why staff's scurrying down the halls and doesn't want to talk to us, because we're in their face. And so once we can have these conversations explaining this to staff and explaining this to families, because staff also doesn't realize typically the only time they call somebody is with bad news. Their purse is missing, they got a bruise, we screwed up on a med. That does not build trust. And so both sides have to take a look at what they're doing. And then, once there's that trust, once we know that they're really there to care for our person, getting a call saying, gosh, your mom had the funniest giggle. She got us all laughing. Or Sam told this joke, or it was the 15th time, but he still gets us every time. I mean, that melts families' hearts. And then they start opening up about real things. It just makes a huge difference. But we have to get everybody on the same page. And like you said, the only way we can do that is to have these conversations, to have these educational resources like your book, and to tell people, don't be frightened to ask a question.
As caregivers, as doctors and nurses, we have a lot of guilt that we carry around as well. Are we good enough? Are we redirecting the correct way? We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make their life happy, and we're also sad to watch them decline or have problems. It gets to us. So we should all be working together, not at odds, and understanding each other is the goal, but that's what we have to keep striving for. I realize it's not a perfect process.
Well, and it's hard when you have limitations by the insurance companies of how much time you can spend. And then, you don't want to sound like you're whining, like, well, I feel that way too, when you feel like you're supposed to be taking care of them. But yet there's a big piece that gives us balance when that is told, when we hear that, because now that staff person, that medical professional is, we're seeing that human side, which so often we don't. Sometimes we don't know really if it exists because everything seems so wah, 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 coming out of the voices and stuff. And that can just settle a person down. I guess we just call that bedside manner. But again, in this fast-paced world, it's really hard to squeeze everything in that is needed, I would imagine, for an appointment or a consultation.
The amount of regulations that are going through our head as we're talking to people, because they're so highly regulated, and people don't know all the regulations. And sometimes families ask us to do stuff that are not allowed in the regulations. So you're always like trying to juggle that. Plus, the nursing homes are regularly monitored, and abuse allegations could be called at any second, and your jobs could be in jeopardy, or you could be accused of abusing people, and which are very serious allegations. So, I would love just to go over some of the rules like that people really need to know about nursing homes, so they kind of have an idea of what even the staff members were allowed to do and not to do. And for instance, going to activities, we can't make people go to activities. And I can't tell you how many times families would get frustrated with the staff. Like, the activities are there, but all we can do is ask. We can't force. Like, that's just one example of rules where I wish we didn't have all these rules, but with lawyers and insurance companies and Medicare and safety, there's tons of rules. As far as maintaining weight, that was another rule that used to drive me crazy, because when people didn't want to eat, I'm like, so what? Don't let them eat. If they're not saying, oh, I'm hungry. But no, there's rules about you have to maintain weight. If you're losing weight, that sets off another care plan or more paperwork. So that was one of the things that we would talk a lot about, is like, what decisions do you make? Do you let them not eat? Do you put in the tube? So the rules and the quality of life are always kind of like interacting constantly within the nursing home. So I spent some time just trying to really explain what we're allowed to do in nursing homes, even with treating aggression, with restraint, like really trying to make people understand what we have, our limitations are within the homes and the rules. And that always led me to deal with the chapter I put in there the most, and that answers one of the questions I wanted to go over, is the quality of life versus the quantity of life. And I actually made an equation in the book to help people really make hard decisions, because these decisions sometimes feel completely impossible. Like, the one I think of the most is people who want to eat things they're not supposed to eat on their diet. To the point that, like, if they're having trouble swallowing, they could aspirate and die, or choke and die, or have pneumonia. And it's like, wow, what decision do I make? Do I let my mother eat things they're not supposed to eat and that can hasten their death? Or do I just let them be happy? Like, these are constant decisions we had to make with families, and they were really hard. So I wanted to give people, and for me, because of my experience with my mom, it was always weighing the quality of her life. Like, if that pizza is going to give her quality of life, but shorten, the quantity of her life. I may go with the pizza because dementia is a terminal illness, which is very hard for people at times to grasp, but it is a terminal illness. So you have to think of all decisions and nursing home decisions based on that fact that you want them to have a quality of life, even if their idea of what quality of life sounds really bad for them and can hurt or harm them. So that's really the other major reason I wanted to write the book, was to really kind of go over that decision-making process, how I would do it for my mother or father, or understanding dementia and our limitations in our treatment.
And I think that's really important. And, but so much of preparing for those decisions needs to be done way ahead of time. Having this conversation about death and dying and what do you want in your life? And we're so fearful to have those conversations like, well, if we talk about it, it's going to happen. And it's like, well, no, probably if you talk about it, it's not going to happen, but you'll be prepared. Everyone will be a little more comfortable. And if you change your mind, the forms can be changed. But having those powers of attorney and those healthcare declarations and the 5 wishes, all of those things filled out, it shouldn't be a one-sided conversation like, okay, you've got the terminal illness, so you need to answer this. This should be everybody in the family going, what do I want in mind? Because it might be different than what you want. And we all want control over our life. So why are we giving up the end of our life by not having these conversations? It makes no sense to me.
It happens all the time. People lose control and family members make decisions for them that I'm sure they would not have wanted.
Or the fighting in the families too, because no, they would want this, no, they would want that, and you see and you hear about that. And then the poor doctors are like, okay, now what do we do? And then some land back in court and you go, well, how do we get there? Well, it was a pretty easy path because nobody was communicating.
Doctors listen to the loudest voice in the room and the one that they think may bring them to court and sue them. That's what I've seen. I've seen doctors go against people's living wills because of that. And it blows my mind. It's like they're so afraid of a lawsuit, pulling people the hardest. I work in a respirator type facility where we have to decide whether to pull people's respirators. But even though the person would say in their living will, I don't want to live this way, I've told them I want to go. If that one family member comes and is very angry and says, I want them to live longer, that's like killing them. The doctor would listen to that one person despite the living will. So we have to have these conversations. So people laugh at me at this thing called the Death Cafe that I've been wanting to do, and all my friends make fun of me, but I'm like, we have to talk about death because it's going to happen to all of us. So we should do it sooner rather than later because it could happen at any time as well. So
yeah, and maybe we need to call them living cafes because it's still about life. It's about quality of life. And then you sneak that in there that, if you really want control over your life, at the end, you have to make some statements now. You have to, consciously think about this, and you can't keep it to yourself. You have to let other people know, and you have to let your doctors know and your attorneys know and, whoever is in charge, because you want that followed. And I think the other thing that people don't understand is even when you have these conversations, like I had this with my mom, and we had our whole plan, put out and all set. And yet, when the time came, I wasn't ready. And so, my mom was in the nursing home for 10 years, and she ended up going on hospice. She was starting to have tremors, and they thought, okay, this is probably going to be the end. And so I had to update all the paperwork. So we sat on her bed, the nurse and I updated her paperwork, and then the nurse went to make copies. And my mom was sleeping in her big Jerry wheelchair. I'll never forget this. And she was literally sleeping, snoring. And I remember holding her hand, crying, going, Mom, is this really what you want? I need to know right now from you, is this still what you want? And out of a dead sleep, she turns her head and she goes, yeah. And then she went right back to sleep. But it was like, even though I had this great relationship with my mom, I was very close with her. We had these conversations numerous times. You still second guess. For me, that was a huge gift for my mom to be able to like pull that out and go, yep. And then she ended up living 4 more years. So, but it's difficult even when you have the conversations, and when you don't have the conversations, it's horrific on everybody.
I had so many people over 90-year-old were so ready to pass. Like, I can't tell you how many times people have asked me to kill them, help them die. I'm like, they're so ready. At 90, you are ready. If anybody over 90 tells you that, just believe them. And it's not abnormal. They're tired, they're exhausted, in pain. So it's just natural. They've done everything they want. I would get consults for people who said they wanted to die, and I'm like, they're 90. It's okay to want that. It's not like always this horrific, horrible thing. But yeah, the last part of my book that I thought was important was to really look at your parenting, your mother-daughter, father-son relationships. I think that really comes into play when you're making end-of-life decisions. A lot of people who have, like, if their mother or father was abusive in some way or neglectful in some way, it's really, really hard for those family members to come back and make these hard decisions. So I talk about in the book how I healed my relationship with my mom, because she passed before I was able to resolve a lot of anger and upset I had with her. So I put that in the book about how I resolve that anger and that frustration, because I feel like if you don't, it will impact your decision making. Either avoiding the nursing home, avoiding mom, avoiding making decisions, just angry. And you don't want your parent to pass with all that anger, because when they pass, you're left with all that anger and that frustration and hurt that you haven't dealt with, and that's just not a good place to be. So I put in there how I dealt with it. So it's a very personal book for me, and I disclose some things that were hard and vulnerable, but just to help people make those same decisions and understand, because there's some parents that no matter how hard you work as kids, they're never happy. Your mom is always going to complain when you go into that nursing home. You're never going to get that love and that acceptance. And so I watched those families struggle so much. And I think part of that book was written for them, not to go there and expect mom to change and be loving and nurturing and caring. And then the other part of the book was for people who really fear that loss, like fear that, abandonment. Because a little bit is an abandonment of, like, the most important relationship you have in your whole life is with your mom. I mean, that is the most intense relationship. So I think a lot of people held on to their mom longer than they should have, to the point that the person suffered a little bit, because of fear of loss. So I really think it's important to look at how, if your decisions are based a little bit on fear of letting go and fear of loss, you shouldn't make it from that place. It should be, for my mom, I wanted her to go because she was suffering, and it was hard for me to let her go, but I didn't want that suffering to continue. So we didn't do anything to prolong. She wanted to live longer, and she did a lot of things that made her probably suffer more because she wanted to do it. But I was fine with her not doing any of that, because it's not, I'm not going to make a decision based on my fear of losing her. It's on what is her happiness and what makes her not suffer. So that was the other important part of the book for me, I think, that I want to convey to families.
Death is something we all have to deal with. And so why we try to scoot around it, I mean, it's right up there with taxes, I mean, it's just something that's going to happen. And so, we all come into this life, we're all going out of this life, and why not do it on your terms? Why not have a pact with your family and friends of how you want that to occur? With dementia, a lot of times people will not remember maybe their loved ones. And then what I found too was that people asked how my mom was doing for two different reasons. And in one group, really cared about how my mom was doing and how my relationship was with her. And then the other ones were like, well, she doesn't remember you, so you don't have to go see her. And so you, even within your own friends or family, there can kind of be this split thing because one side is so uncomfortable with the conversation or hearing about the process of dying or a chronic illness or what's happening. It's like, you don't have to go, because then if you don't go, then you don't have to tell me, and then I'm safe. And then others, really want it to support you on that journey. It's not about us, it's about them. What is their best life? And how do we support that? Or my brother once heard my mom, there's my mother. She took such good care of me. And he's like, doesn't that make you mad? How could she get you mixed up with grandma? You don't look anything like grandma. And he, it was all about taking it personal, because my mom didn't remember him either. She called him Chuck, her brother. And so I said, Mark, you look like Chuck when he was younger. She's gone back in time. This isn't to push your buttons. This isn't to be disrespectful. This is still very loving. She loves Chuck. And for me, she somehow, my mom didn't have a good relationship with her mom either. Her mom abandoned her when her dad had a massive heart attack and left her home alone. And so she had some issues with her mom, but somehow that healed through our caring relationship. How beautiful. I got to be part of that. I don't know what I did, but it brought her peace. And, we really do have to step in their shoes and look at things from their perspective. We just have a more compassionate heart because we're just looking from a different angle. And I think your book has, just great resources and reflections in it and the sense of humor. I think most people are going to really appreciate. Some people will just be too tense, and this isn't funny, but most people on a journey with dementia will say, you're going to laugh or you're going to cry, and you're probably going to do both. But what do you want more of? And how do you make, remarkable moments is really through joy and laughter. You can even speak as a doctor in terms of what laughter does to our body chemistry, to bring us back in balance, to calm us down. We need to use all of these tools, to move through this. And we need to have these conversations about, what is precious in our life, what is important today and tomorrow. And it could be little things, even like, because a lot of times people are moving out of their house into a nursing home or a memory care. What are the important things that need to go with them? You better figure that out. And if they're progressed far enough, then you need to talk to maybe some other family members or friends that know, oh, they bought this piece was really special because they bought this on their honeymoon, or, whatever. Those things can be really, really important to people. And we have to get to know each other better.
I have conversations with my kids about death and dying, including my own passing. I don't believe we die. I believe we pass to another energy, but I openly talk to my kids. I need to prepare them to live life and be independent and handle things without me there. And I let them know, I'm training you for all that purpose, because I'm not always going to be here. And they're like 5 and 7, and we have those conversations. Went to her funeral. The hospice worker was fine with the kids coming in. They said goodbye to their grandmother, and they said beautiful things to her. And I know, even though she couldn't hear anything, she knew their presence was there. And we normalized dying. And that's what we have to really think about in our society, that with our own children, have those conversations, don't avoid it to the last minute, because none of our lives are guaranteed or promised forever. So kids, even as young as my 5 and 7-year-old, can handle it.
I think when you bring it on as this is normal, it's not as scary for them. My mom was really big. She would bring us to all the wakes and the funerals, and her friends are, oh, you shouldn't be bringing the kids. My mom was very adamant. They need to know about death. They need to know. In fact, even some people might not believe this, but my mom and I ended up at the very end having a very spiritual relationship, and she would come to me in dreams at the very end when she couldn't even speak. And, one time it was like, 2 a.m, she's like, you better finish my obituary because I'm not hanging around here much longer. And I was like, okay, I go running out and I'm working on her obituary. And then she came to me a little closer to when she was dying. And she says, you're not going to be here. I need you gone. You're always the one to help people pass, and the rest of the family needs to learn. You know how important this has been to me all of my life. You will not be here. I need you gone. They need to touch and feel the process. And sure as heck, I had 2 keynotes in Arizona, and I said goodbye to my mom when she was actively dying. My whole family thought I was having a nervous breakdown. Like how, because this was so out of character for me to leave, because I was always that person at the bedside. And I felt very comfortable. And I had told my daughter ahead of time, we had conversations about this. And I said, this is what Grandma's telling me. And I left, and it was like she had lined up perfect people my whole trip. Person on the plane, the person sitting next to me at the baggage claim. I mean, it was like perfect. And then what happened, which was really incredible, and she taught me a new tool to care, because I wasn't really into the video conferencing. So when I'm sitting in baggage claim, my daughter calls and she says, Grandma's having a hard time breathing. Do you want to say goodbye again? And I said, yeah, why don't you put her on the phone? And she says, no, let's FaceTime. And I'm like, okay, so here I am in baggage claim, crying, looking at my mom, saying goodbye one more time. And she ends up living. But the woman next to me, sat next to me at the plane, across the row, heard my whole conversation with the man who was next to me on the plane, whose father-in-law had dementia. So the whole flight, we're talking dementia. And she hands me a Kleenex and says, I wish I would have known you when I was going through this with my mother. And it was just amazing. So we did this whole virtual, meetings. And we did, I got back to my hotel. We actually did 6-8 hour visual with the camera. And I wasn't hands-on, but I could guide my family, on what to do. Grandma's hot. Go get some washcloths. Don't just ask for a couple. Ask for a whole bag. And get some ice, and so I could guide them into what to do. So they had the hands-on experience. And, I could even joke and put my one brother who was being just a jerk in place when no one else would. And, the room broke out, and I got to see her take her last breath. I got to do last rites. I mean, I was totally part of the process, but my mom got her wish that I wasn't there and everyone else was more involved. And so, it was beautiful. I think we just need to be more respectful of one another. And I think we have to look inward in terms of how do we want to live if we've got dementia or another chronic illness, or if we're involved in just a horrible accident. How prepared are we to help our loved ones out when the time comes? Because to me, that's a big piece of it, is I want to make it easier on them.
I always let them know, I'll be fine. I'll be in another place where there's no suffering. I'll be watching you.
This has been a great conversation. Anything else that you want to add about your book, Look, I Shrunk Grandma?
No, I think you did a great job. I really enjoyed your story too. To say, you handled it amazing. How I want every family member to do it, and you live without fear. And I'm sure you felt afraid, but you went and plunged along and did everything how I would want every family member. And I'm truly saying that out of sincerity. And you gave your mom a beautiful passing, so that's very touching.
I think one of the last things that I can add for maybe family members and for staff too is one of the things that I learned on my 30-year journey when I would get really frustrated. And this helped me immensely. And I wish I would have learned it earlier, in the first 20 years. But it took me 20 years to figure this out. When I would really get pushed against the wall, when I would feel really afraid and just scared and out of control, I would sometimes go in my basement even when no one was home, and I would just scream, what is the lesson? There's got to be a reason. What is the lesson? Why are we all going through this? And what was funny with that is because I didn't feel comfortable doing that out in front of people, because I would sometimes, you're just ready to lose it and you don't want to look like a crazy person. Now I can say it in a calmer fashion, still have the same effect. But what was interesting was it made me realize I wasn't looking how to fix the problem. I was spinning in the spew of confusion. Mm-hmm. And so even though I thought I was looking for the solution, I thought I was on top of the problem, I wasn't at all. Because usually within 15 minutes to an hour, because then once I would let that out of me and I would focus on what's the lesson, I would start looking for different things, and it was like, oh, it wasn't about that at all. It was about this. And it was just kind of a shocking thing, but that kind of helped my journey, I think, become a little bit more spiritual, and you learned lessons of different levels of unconditional love, that life changes as you go through this process. And it was almost, in fact, I just interviewed a man, we were on Tuesday, regarding this whole thing, and he has a book called, A Path Revealed. Mm-hmm. And he says it's all about his wife's early onset, but really it's a spiritual journey, and how it was all filled with love and hope, but he just kind of reframed everything. He looked at things differently. He looked at himself differently, how he did things. And it's not just them, it's all of us that have an effect on one another. And so we really do have to look at it from is individualized as dementia is, and the death and dying process is, it's still kind of a tribal thing that affects many. And so we have to look at it from big and small views.
It's not always an answer or something you could fix. Sometimes you just have to be there. You just have to be present for people.
That's an excellent point, because we can't fix it, but we can support it.
Right.
So now people can, at Karen Severson, MD at Comcast.net. We've got that on the radio show and the blog. And then you also gave us a phone number for Clarity Health Solutions. So that phone number is 561-781-3333. And again, thank you so much for your time today. This has really, really been an interesting conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Jared Sebesti here, host of Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. Few people could just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 plus years, retiring on Friday, without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.